Rise Up and Run. Stories of deliverance and transformation through the power of Jesus Christ that allows people to rise up from bondage and run in freedom. I'm your host, Janice. Hey, this is Janice, and welcome back to another episode of Rise Up and Run. We have someone as our guest today who just blew me away. I felt like I kind of knew her, but then I read her book and I didn't know her at all. But her story is, I don't know, you'll have to make your own adjective because it's amazing. And not just her story, but her dad's story. So her name is Amy Landers Kearney, and I just want to welcome you to my podcast.
Thank you, Janice. I'm super excited.
I am too. So Amy and I don't even know, we didn't really work together. We worked for the same agency.
Yeah.
We worked for the Department of Corrections. I was a PO and she was a supervisor at the Women's Center.
Yeah.
So same department, different buildings, rarely saw each other. I don't know how we stumbled upon each other, like at church or something.
Probably at church through mutual friends and stuff too, I think.
Yeah.
Probably. Yeah.
You know how you're Facebook friends a little bit and you just kind of, I don't want to say like voyeur, you know, you're just kind of like watching someone else's life. And I knew something was going on with your dad, but it was just like, what is happening? And then when you came out with your book, I'm not a reader. I wish that I was.
Yeah.
I'm just not. Your book, and I would say this even if you weren't sitting here, I read it in like 2 days. Mm-hmm. And that's fast for me. It was just things that I never thought about before or considered. It was really good, Amy.
Thank you.
It was really good. So we have been talking a little bit, trying to figure out how we're going to tell this story, because a huge part of this is her book about her dad's story. But we also want to know a little bit about Miss Amy. So should we start like with your childhood or wherever you want to be?
I think that's a great place to start. So I will go back to 1977, the year that I was born. I was born in Waterloo, Iowa, and have been pretty much a lifetime resident of Waterloo. I was the second child to a man named Russell and an amazing soul, my mother, Becky Landers. My mom in 1977 was a teacher. She had started on her long journey of teaching, had me, took a little time off and went right back to teaching. My dad around that time was in the mix of either doing car sales or insurance sales. He just had a plethora of jobs throughout his life. So I was the second child, older brother Ryan, and behind me was my younger brother Michael. We call him Mike. My childhood was very normal for the most part. Having a mom as a teacher, education was very important in my family. And as a little girl, having an older brother and grandparents who lived on a farm, I did a lot of outdoor stuff. I was one that went to my grandparents every weekend, sat down at the table. They were very strong in their Lutheran faith, so if we didn't make it to church that day, we heard the entire service sitting at lunch or dinner. And so my grandmother was a brilliant cook, an amazing cook, so it wasn't hard to sit and listen because we were eating good. So as far back as I can remember, we were in the creek catching minnows. We were trying to reach through gates and pet cows, watching the birth of kittens or puppies on the farm. And just a lot of my childhood was so very normal. I was introduced to the church at a very young age, baptized into the Lutheran faith, and that was just something that was very important to us. And so as a little girl, I remember going to Zion Lutheran Church in Waterloo. It's on the corner, Six Corners, if you're familiar with that area. And we did things like Bible school in the summer, where my dad would load up the neighborhood kids and take all of them to Sunday school, which was absolutely amazing because we made bread that smelled really good, and we got to like design it in a cross or just make this bread that really stands out to me. But it was then that I began my journey with the Lord. Yeah. That's with me still today. So as a little girl, I was very close to my neighborhood friends. I grew up, my neighborhood is in the country. My mom still lives there to this day. My dad actually, along with his father, built her home. And the day that I was born in May of 1977, my dad was actually, and my grandfather were putting the roof on their house. And so I had the same group of friends, still friends with them to this day. One of them is still my very best friend in the world, Angela. And so, small neighborhood, 10 homes, maybe 11 homes, and it was safe to play outside. All the families were friends, and I just had I have really good memories of being young in that neighborhood.
It sounds like perfect.
It was perfect. It really,
Yeah.
and the neighborhood is still that way to this day.
What neighborhood?
It's off of Dysart Road. The main road, it's a dead end, but it's Wedgwood Road. So
Okay, I
we
think
would
I know
always
where
say,
that
shout
is.
out to Wedgwood Road.
That's hard to say.
Yeah.
Wedgwood Road.
Wedgwood Road. In fact, any of those neighborhood kids that listen to this will be super excited. We put Wedgwood on the map.
But nobody could say it.
Yes. So as a little girl growing up, I was good in school. My best friend actually one night came home from school. We were at Orange at the time, Orange Elementary School. And she came home and pulled out a flyer that we were given, and it was to start on Sharks swim team. And so she asked if I would go with her. Our parents decided, yes, let's let them go. And we started on this new journey of being swimmers. My best friend actually decided to leave swimming not too long after and went into dance. And I continued swimming. I was in gymnastics as well. And probably about 3 years into my swimming career, I started to be pretty good. And so swimming had to take precedence over gymnastics. And so I had to let that go. And I was swimming every night, 5 nights a week, and competing on the weekends. My mom and dad were always there to support me, and my poor brothers also were along, having
Like it or
to,
not.
you like it or
Come
not, we're going. And we'd travel the Midwest so I could compete. Got to be a point where I was able to compete at a national level, and became a state champion when I was 12 years old for the first time. So swimming was my love. And again, life was just very normal for us. When I started high school, I was still swimming, and at my first high school swim meet my freshman year, I broke 2 records at Waterloo West High. And so it was going to be just easy for me, an easy road. I started getting scholarship offers. And then things started to change for me in high school. We started to find freedom in not having our parents around all the time. We started to find
Me, you and Angela.
me and Angela and I. Yes, we did.
Anytime you talk about we, we'll just assume it's Angela.
Yes, that's a good assumption. We just started, friends were able to drive, and that was new. It was a new adventure for us. Started to have a boyfriend, and things just started to spiral for me. Spiral downward, yeah. Yep. Swimming wasn't as important. And, the family annual Disney World trips that my family had done weren't as important. Those things that had been important to me growing up just were slowly fading for me. And I wanted to run and be on a journey. Today, I understand where I was at through this amazing personality assessment called the Enneagram. I know why I did what I did and why I do what I do because of that. My life is always on an adventure, and I'm always looking for more. And so back in early high school years, that's what I was doing. I ended up getting sent away more than once. I was sneaking out of the window at my parents' home. I was not coming home on curfew. I was the naughty child, and it went from being a state champion swimmer to going to the youth shelter and going to the detention center, and eventually ending up a China case, which is a child in need of assistance. And that led me to different placements, and ended up at an amazing place in Des Moines called Orchard Place, where I spent just a little over a year. And through that journey, I met some amazing people who tried to help me navigate my way back to a quote normal lifestyle. But at that point, things in my life had really started to change on the outside, not just within myself, but in my home life between my parents. And the structure of my family was changing. And so I was living in Des Moines, trying to work on myself and be able to fix traumas that had happened to me along the way, just as a little girl. And so I was learning those things, but things were falling apart at the same time. And a whole new journey was transpiring that I had no idea was happening. And so...
Is this where we go into Dad?
Yeah, we could do that because that's where the story would go. That's the trajectory of events that would take me into something that I never expected, especially coming from such a normal family.
Yeah. So were you being a rascal like while your parents' marriage was still intact?
Yes.
You were rascaling then?
Yeah, I was. And I think that it definitely didn't help my parents' marriage. Was it the reason? Absolutely not. It was just, there were so many things going on financially, and my dad going between jobs. You know, both of my parents are college educated. My mom was very steady as a second grade teacher. That's what she did. My dad, very different. Like I said, he was brilliant in a lot of ways. He could sell insurance. He could sell cars. He could fix TVs. He could fix a car. If you had anything wrong with your car, he'd be the one to fix it because he was just able to fix anything. But their marriage financially was taking a toll. All my issues and being gone for days at a time started to take a toll on them as well.
Can I ask a question? So
Yeah.
was your dad, kind of almost makes it sound like what you were saying about yourself, was he just not able to hold a job, or did he just have a variety of different jobs over a period of time?
Yeah, you know, I think he was always looking for more.
Kind of like,
Yes.
I mean, when you hear about all this stuff that Amy is doing, you'll be like, is she one person or more? So that
Yeah.
makes me kind of think of your dad.
Yeah.
Just like, done that. Let me try that over there again.
Yes, and he did. He was always, I can remember as a little girl, him talking about he was going to be a millionaire by the age of 45, or just all these dreams that he had to have stability financially. Like I really remember he read a lot of Anthony Robbins books, or the How to Be Rich in 30 Days, or, you know, those type of things. He read a lot. He loved learning. He went to UNI, had a bachelor's degree, and really never used it. It was in music education. Wow. And actually he taught band for a few years and then stopped and started doing other things. So he was always searching, always looking, always projecting what could happen and manifesting things. And yeah, so that my family, like I said, was just really starting to change. It would have been my 9th grade year when I was sent away and living in Des Moines, and things were drastically changing at home.
Tell me.
Yeah.
I know it's coming because I've read the book.
Yeah. So while away, I was working my way through a program. I had an amazing counselor who really identified things in me that needed to be addressed. Some traumas as a little girl that was outside of my nuclear family, things that had happened. Mm-hmm. And so she was helping me identify those things, still having family counseling. My parents would come on the weekend and we would just spend time together processing things that had been going on. And one day on a family visit, I walked outside to my dad's license plate upside down on his car. And I think that's where I really started to realize something is really off with my dad. We generally would go out to eat on visits, and I remember my mom very assertive and very upfront with me about your dad's doing some strange things. I remember sitting out to eat, asking questions about the license plate, and my mom would interject quite often in the conversation. I don't know, he's crazy. He's acting crazy. I don't know what's going on, but it needs to stop.
And so he was there too?
Yep,
You and your mom
he was
and your
there.
dad?
Yep. And so that day came and went, and then I earned my visits, and what that means was children that lived in Orchard Place, if they had a home that they were going to and they reached a certain level, you'd be able to go home. And for usually a day or two at a time. Well, Des Moines and Waterloo are about 2 hours apart. And so I was given the opportunity to start having visits from Friday to Monday. And so we had a scheduled visit. My mom picked me up on a Friday evening, and we had the understanding that I was to have a family counseling session on Monday afternoon. So we would need to return for that counseling session. And in the meantime, some things had happened in my counseling sessions that alerted my counselor that my dad something was going awry. Something was strange. He was just having some erratic beliefs, specifically pertaining to the government or the injustices of the government or paying taxes, just some different things that were coming that had never been there.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
In your book, did you say that he went like on a trip for a
Yep.
weekend or something
Yep.
and came back with all of this?
Yes. Yeah. So I can jump back to that before this visit where I went home on Friday and had to return on Monday for the scheduled counseling session. My dad had met a group of people, and this was some of the things that were going on back home that I wasn't a part of. I only heard of afterwards. But he had met this group of people, and they called themselves, I believe, We the People. And they were a very different yet very erratic group. And my dad left for about 4 or 5 days to Jackson Hole, Wyoming. My older brother Ryan, had mentioned, well, hey, I'd love to ski in Jackson Hole. Can I go with you? And so Ryan rode along. Maybe it was about a week that they spent in Jackson Hole. And my older brother, in his infinite wisdom, always, when he returned, would always talk about how my dad went there one person and came back a very different person. Those erratic beliefs they had taken over. And so he just got, things that he never would have talked about prior to that trip, that was what he thought about when he woke up and when he went to bed. Just the crazy, erratic stuff.
When I was reading that book, I was like, what happened?
Yeah. We've often questioned that too. We've often questioned.
Really talked about any of that?
He was in meetings. He had talked about being in meetings. He had talked about the people that he was able to connect with in Jackson Hole. My immediate family have all questioned, was he brainwashed? There was just things you just don't talk about, or you just so far off the wall that just didn't make any sense. He was still my dad, but he just had these strange thoughts, And so I'm on that visit, and my dad was home, and then on Saturday, he actually said he was going to a meeting, and he would be back on Monday in time to take me back to Des Moines and go to our family session. And so Monday came, and we waited till the last minute before we had to leave to make that counseling session. It was, again, a 2-hour drive, and at one point, I remember my mom specifically saying, he's going to miss it. If we don't go now, you're going to be late being back. And my mom is a very big stickler on following rules. And so we were back by 4 without my dad. My therapist, knowing and being filled in by my mother, had known that there was just quite a few strange things going on. And we proceeded with that meeting. And that day came and went. A couple days went by, and my mom would call, and my dad he hadn't came home. A week goes by, 2 weeks go by. My mom came up each weekend, and still no dad. No sign of him.
She had no idea where
No
he was.
idea. The only thing we knew, and they had been married. Interesting enough, that Friday before that visit, before I went home, my dad had left a ring and a necklace on my mom's desk at school with a card that said, "Happy 24th wedding anniversary, love you." And it was left on the desk like the day before he left. And so it was just very awkward. A couple weeks go by, my mom and my older brother decide to put out a missing persons report, which they did with the Waterloo Police Department, and people began looking for him. His parents, he has 2 sisters that were very concerned just because of the erratic things he had been doing. It often went through my head as a 16-year-old at the time, is he in a ditch somewhere and nobody can find him? There's just so many strange things going on, and it happened so quickly. And so here we are 3 to 4 weeks in, and I'm living at Orchard Place. My mom's coming to visit faithfully, and my dad had known that I had the privilege to go to the mall. And so I often, on the weekends, especially on Fridays, would go to, it would have now been Southridge Mall in Des Moines. I would get on the bus, ride the bus, go spend some time at the mall with friends from school, and come back. On this one particular day, it was 4 weeks after anybody had heard from him, the missing persons were out. I got off the bus, and I can remember as I sit here and talk about this, I can see myself walking into that mall. I always went in the same door where the buses dropped you off, and as I walked in, there was the food court, and I walked in, I looked around, and I noticed a bunch of cowboys. And I had known that before my dad left, he had went from dressing very normal to being a cowboy. And so, or wearing a cowboy hat, a cowboy belt buckle, the boots, the whole 9 yards. And I remember seeing that group of cowboys, and I thought, gosh, I wonder if that's Dad. And as I'm walking, I saw him. And it had, again, 4 weeks since anybody had heard from him. As a 16-year-old, and your dad being your best friend in the world, besides Ange, to see him, I lost all control, and I remember running to him and getting to him, and I was yelling, "Dad, Dad," and he turned to me, and he came running to me, and we hugged, and all the emotions that were going through me really drew a response from people that were eating and people that were working, because I was pretty loud. I really thought he was dead somewhere. And so hugging him and touching him and having him tell me, "I knew you'd be here, that's why I'm here," and I just pushed him away from me. It was a very erratic response to emotion, because I became angry then. Like, where have you been? Mom is waiting for you. Ryan and Mike needed you. Where'd you go? And his response to me was so bizarre. And he said, "I'm undercover for the military, and I had to leave. And I want you to meet Dana." And right there in that moment, I froze, because I thought, my dad raised me the right way when it came to marriage and what marriage means and vows. There had been times as a little girl, an argument between my parents, and my dad would promise me he would never divorce my mom, just because that was biblical. And so he knew the truth. He knew what was right. So this wasn't, while it looked like him and it sounded like him, he was a completely different person. So that in itself, I looked over, I saw this woman amongst a bunch of other people dressed in cowboy gear. As a child, a 16-year-old child going through so much and trying to learn why I did what I did and why I was in the position I was in and away from my friends and family, I clung to him even harder. I needed to know what was happening and why he was doing what he was doing. And again, this was my dad was my person. Whenever I give a speech on my book, I talk about, imagine your person as a little girl or as a little boy. Who was it? Your mom, your dad, your grandparent, a sibling? For me, it wasn't that I wasn't close to my mom or close to my grandparents. He was just my person. And so I clung to him even harder. We then put together a plan of him sneaking to see me, because at this point, my group home had made it clear my dad was not allowed on their premises until we knew what was going on. And for me, that wasn't an option. I needed to see him. I needed to know where he was. I needed to know what he was doing. And so with a lot of little pieces in between, He said he would be back in a couple weeks. I attended an off-site high school. It's called Lincoln High School in Des Moines. And we planned to meet at a Subway across the street. And so we did that. And it was very sneaky, but my heart would not allow me to let my mom continue to suffer. You know, her husband of 24 years, although she knew he was doing strange things, her heart was also hurting. And I felt that, I could see that, I could sense that. She faithfully came to see me, and I felt that I needed to tell her I saw him.
So at that point you were the only one that
Yes.
knew that
Yes.
he was alive?
Yes.
And, oh my word.
Yes.
Oh my word. That's a lot for a little
Yeah.
teenager to carry.
Yeah, it was. It really was. And I remember pondering, do I tell? Will he get in trouble? I didn't know what would happen. I just knew I loved him. He was my dad. And so that was on a Friday. He drove me back to Orchard Place and dropped me off around the corner. And again, we had made plans to see each other when he was coming back through Des Moines. I didn't speak to the lady, Dana. She made me angry, and I felt angry at her without even knowing her. I just didn't, that was not an option for me at the time. And so he dropped me off around the corner, and I walked back like nothing happened. And that weekend, my mom came up, and we went off-site to eat and just spend time together. And I told her, I'll never forget, there's a really beautiful lake in Des Moines called Saylorville Lake. And we went out there and we started walking like we often did. We parked the car and went walking, and we were sitting overlooking this beautiful lake. The sun was going down, and I looked at her and I said, I have to tell you something, Mom. And she knew. She knew right then and there. She'll tell you today. She knew I was going to say I knew where he was at. So I told her everything. I told her he was at the mall. I told her that there was somebody else. And man, to be a 16-year-old and watch your mom's heart shatter in a million pieces was tough. And so she immediately filed for divorce, and rightfully so. It was shortly after that, I believe, that my grandparents then heard from him. And they wanted to know, what are you doing? Like, you just left your family. Things that that will show you, and it go throughout the book, you can see there was just possibly some mental illness things going on there. You don't just leave your family, and with a faith like my dad's and a relationship with Jesus like my dad had and projected onto me, it just doesn't happen that way.
It was like I said, what happened?
Yes.
I mean, just like
Yes.
two different people. Now, did he have any contact with your brothers?
Interesting. He did not yet at that point. There was a time, I'll just move forward to, I'd been home only about a week. I was not able to, once I discharged from Orchard Place, I was sneaking to see him. So I wasn't sharing that because I knew they would pull my school because that's where I was seeing him. And we had open lunch, which just meant we could leave the campus for lunch, and that's when I would see him. And it was random. It was a couple months probably because he was traveling the United States by that point. And so it was random when he would come through Iowa that I would see him. And if I remember correctly, he had a contact for a friend of mine at Lincoln High School that he could call their home, and then they would relay the message to me at school. And so I don't think he was allowed to talk to my brothers. At that time, DHS had gotten involved, and due to his strange behavior and my mom's attorneys putting some stuff in the divorce paperwork or divorce order, he couldn't see them except through supervised visits at DHS, just for everyone's safety. Mm-hmm. And so I got home, I was discharged from Orchard Place. He was on the road, and I came home to a very different home than I had remembered. Everything was different. Even people's personalities were different, including my own. The structure of my family, you know, this family that goes to Disney World and loves Clark Griswold and vacation movies, was now just broken. And I felt that. But I also felt a need that I needed to go. My personality is I have to do something fun or be adventurous to take away from the hurt in my life, and I was seeking that. And I was also so worried about him. He's alone. My family's here. I can go with him. And so that's exactly what I did. I ended up contacting him. At the time, he was in Washington State, and he agreed to pick me up. And so the day that he picked me up, I was at a friend's house. I gave the address. He came in the house dressed in cowboy gear, again, had his .357 on his hip, .357 bullets across the top of his shoes. He was dressed very sharp, and he handed everybody money in the house for taking care of me. And we got in the van and off to New York we went. And right before that, he had scheduled a visit with my little brother. And so we actually went to the DHS building in Waterloo, and I was hiding in the back of the van, actually laying down just in case anybody saw me. And because now I was going to be a runaway again.
And your mom obviously had no
My
idea.
mom had no idea.
Okay. Poor mom. What was her name? Becky?
Becky, yeah.
Becky.
She's an amazing soul to this day.
I'm just like,
Yeah.
my heart breaks for Becky.
Yeah, there's so much. And
my
in my book, I talk a lot about my story and my dad's story. And I didn't want to leave her out because I think in the intro, when I thank people closest to me, I do tell her and thank her because she's been the one that's got me to where I'm at today. Even despite everything that, as you know from the book, that's happened, even outside of this, from losing a child to my mom has been through it, and she is
She
a
used to write a
soldier.
book.
She's talked about it.
I mean, I just feel like, just
Yeah.
from her vantage point,
Yeah,
what
yeah.
on earth is going on with my husband?
Yeah, yeah.
And then my daughter.
Yes, all of it.
Becky, I'm sorry.
Yes,
Wow.
she's amazing. She's amazing. So yeah, there I am. And speaking of Becky, what happened to her in this moment? I'm in the back of this truck or this van, and my dad goes in. He has a long black trench coat on, a black cowboy hat. He looked really nice. He goes in, gets on the elevator, and when he gets to the floor, third floor, the doors open and there's my mom. And it was the first time she had seen him since that day we put him in the car and he left and never came back. And so they froze for a minute. And for her, it was more emotional. For him, it was more, he just looked at her and said hi like nothing had happened. He gets off the elevator, she gets on and couldn't look back at him. And here she knew she had just taken my little brother, who was 10 at the time, to see him, which made her, I'm sure, all the emotions. You don't deserve to see him. You left him. And she's at that time worried about me, doesn't know I'm actually in the parking lot. So my dad spent about an hour with Mike that day and got in the van, and we literally drove straight through to Jamestown, New York. And here is a journey where I began to learn what he was doing, although I never knew the extent of how crazy it was, just because it was so deep. It had to do with class action lawsuits that were not true. It had to do with militias. It had to do with just some crazy things. I was learning what he was doing. And so we got to Jamestown, New York, checked into a hotel, and that next night he was in front of a church, a very scary church actually in the Bronx. I knew I was in God's home, but I was scared because I stood out front and watched people not only steal the hubcaps off a car, but they actually stole the tires were being stolen off the car. So that was my first experience in New York.
Now, was Dana and her daughter with you?
Dana was with us. Her daughter was not yet at that time.
Okay, she's coming.
Yep, she's coming. And so, that was the thing. They decided, well, if Amy's with us, why don't we get Ashley? And Ashley was a year younger than me. And at some point, we flew her out to us, I believe maybe in Pennsylvania. I can't remember. But then I had somebody to be with. We were traveling. We didn't have a place to live at first. It was traveling, and all this money was coming in, which later I found out, unfortunately, my dad was put in a position to be a treasurer of this fake class action lawsuit that he believed in. Till the day he died, he believed in that was real, that the government owed people money. It was some scam. And so there were 30,000 money orders with my dad's name on it. nobody else's, just his. And so we had money. We had endless money. And so we were staying in hotels, traveling until one day we ended up getting a place in North Carolina. And through some acquaintances of my dad's, one of the owners of Merit Cigarette Company Tobacco Fields actually gave us a place to live that we rented from him. And then we had a centralized place on the East Coast. And so we did a lot of traveling.
So what's the time frame here after you hid in the van and took off before you landed at the tobacco
I would
farm?
say a couple months that we were traveling,
And Mom
and
still
Mom
didn't know where you were?
still didn't know. She had her assumptions because prior to me being sent away, anytime I ran away, I would be caught pretty quickly, within a week, maybe tops. And here we were going on a couple months. So what happened next, really, I was going to these law seminars, listening sometimes. Otherwise, we were traveling, sometimes staying with people. They had some very close friends in Allentown, Pennsylvania. So we stayed there quite a bit. We made a trip back to the Waterloo area where I had to hide. Ashley and I and my best friend Angela came because I needed to see her. She came to the hotel here in Waterloo, and we were only here briefly, and it was so my dad could meet with a couple people that he had originally met that were doing these crazy erratic things. And we're at the hotel and the police were at the door. Somebody had known I was in town, and so the police were at the door. And my sister actually opened the door, and she was very...
Ashley.
Her name is Ashley, but that's not even her real name. She never had a birth certificate. Her mom was always anti-government, and so never had a birth certificate. She wanted to go by the name Ashley, so that's what she went by. And Ashley was very outspoken, very intense, and she opened the door a crack to the police, and they asked if Amy Landers was there. She said, "No, she isn't. I don't even know who you're talking about." And they said, "Well, you're with her dad. He's in a room here, and we need to know if she's with you guys." And Ashley was very adamant I was not there and said, "Go to room, whatever, go talk to her dad." In the meantime, Ashley shuts and locks the door. Somehow, I can't remember to this day how we got me out of the hotel room when the police left my door. I went and got in the van and waited, and one of my dad's friends came out, and we took off and went to another hotel to hide me. And so somebody at that point either saw me or something, because it was shortly after that my mom started suspecting I was with my dad. So we leave the next day and head back to the East Coast. We have the place. We spent a lot of money furnishing the place. My 16th, it must have been my 17th birthday, I had unlimited money to shop at King of Prussia Mall in Philadelphia. It used to be the biggest mall in the world. So I did that. My dad just smiled, and I'm shopping literally like a 16-year-old would. My favorite store at the time, it was called Merry-Go-Round. I think I bought everything in the store. And so,
Wow.
yeah, so that was what my life looked like. I wasn't in school.
Were you happy?
You know, I was, because I was on this endless journey. And for Enneagram 7s, they call us Peter Pan. And it was like, look, the next biggest fun is over there. It's death. Let's go. And that's what 7s, that's how we live our lives. And so I was happy. I was with my dad. And no matter what he did, no matter how crazy his anti-government beliefs were, he loved me well. It might not have been the best parenting, hiding me from my mom.
Wasn't.
It wasn't, but he cared about my heart. He knew my challenges. He knew my desires. He was, like I said, my best friend.
Do you feel like all the good things that happened to you at Orchard Place was just down the
You would
tubes
think
'cause your
so.
dad?
You would think so, but truthfully enough, if you'd go through my memory box today at home, you'd see a lot of stuff from Orchard Place. One of them being a tree of growth, where they gave me this big poster with a basically looked like a dead tree, and it had all these branches with no leaves. And I wrote so many good and positive things that I was learning on that tree. Still things that I use to this day. So I think that had a great impact on me. It was just on hold for a minute. It was kind of a temporary hold. And I would need those things, those pieces of resiliency that I built and learned in Orchard Place for what was transpiring. We were in Pennsylvania, and my sister Ashley, who was 14, I was 16, maybe just turned 17. My dad and my stepmom, we were all at some friends of theirs' house for a couple days in the house in Pennsylvania. And Ashley and I happened to be sitting watching cable TV, which was just becoming a cool thing back then. And this brand new show came out, and I was like, oh, let's watch this. It looks great. It was called Lock Up. And it was where they went into prisons and showed you, like, what does it look like in these prisons? And the very first episode of Lock Up was called Lock Up Rikers Island. And so Ashley and I sat and we were watching that, and I made the comment, oh, Ashley, when we're in New York next week, we knew that was the plan. I want to go there. I got to see that place. Little did I know I would be seeing it firsthand.
I'm just over here cracking up. Oh, that's good. Hey, let's go to Rikers Island.
Let's go see it. The biggest prison in the United States, county jail and prison put together with 17,000 inmates.
Whoa.
But little did I know my story or my journey to New York would take me there. My dad was going to do a 3-day seminar. His seminars now were very, very organized. They had put together these binders. It was called America First. And I can't just throw all this terrible stuff on my dad. Some of the things that he talked about was very real and very true. And it's funny because 30 years later, an example would be I just saw somebody talking about deodorant and how deodorant has aluminum in it and we can't be rubbing that under our arms. Well, he talked about that 30 years ago. And so some of the things that he talked about were true, but like I used to tell him, Dad, you're not going to change it, so just stop. And he wouldn't. So we go and he does a seminar. We're actually at a Travelodge hotel right behind JFK Airport. And this Travelodge hotel, I'm guessing 12 stories tall, literally the airport runways, you can see them from the parking lot. I helped set up the meeting. My sister and I did before we took a cab and went shopping or did whatever it was we were doing that day. He had these 3 seminars, three evenings of the seminar. There was probably 50 people signed up to come to this America First seminar. He charged quite a bit of money to attend. But I won't forget, because in that meeting, he started this new thing where at the beginning of the meeting, he would say, if you're undercover FBI, I hope you learn something. Like, that's my goal, is to teach people about things that are going on that shouldn't be, basically. And so I remember thinking, man, why would there be FBI in here?
So
I had no clue.
Oblivious?
Oblivious.
Oh,
Oblivious.
man.
Even though I knew just from prior to leaving and conversations with my mom and other people, like, your dad he's turned anti-government. He's an extremist. Like, he's gone crazy. So I'm sitting in that meeting, I leave, and then the meeting goes on for 3 days. We did a lot of swimming. We went downtown in Manhattan, shopped in Queens, just did a bunch of different things. And the last day, they were packing up stuff, speakers and notebooks and binders, and we were loading the back of our van. And my dad actually said, Amy, go pull the van up so we can load up. So I did, and I remember walking out, and a bellboy was actually following me. And I remember thinking, like, who is he? And he had a bellboy uniform on, like he worked at the hotel. And as I got in the van, he kind of turned around and went a different way. And at 17, you're just oblivious to whatever's going on. I turned the music up loud because I got to drive. And I remember backing out and looking up on that hotel, and there was a guy up there. And I remember thinking, like, what is he doing? Oh my gosh. And walkie-talkies, both of them had, and I could see him up there talking. And I just thought, oh, it's New York. You never know what's going on. So I back out, I pull up, we load up, and then my dad's best friend at the time, a man named Dana, we were loading his car, and then we pulled out of the hotel parking lot, and there were 2 police cars sitting there. And my dad got on his CB talking to Dana in front of him. And I remember them saying, yeah, just keep driving, whatever. And the police cars come get behind us. One behind Dana in front of us and one behind us. And they were on the CB, and there was a lot of conversation about, you know what to do, and roll down your window just a little bit. And back then, what was called Viper alarm systems were popular. And he rolled down his window about half an inch and shut off the van, and the Viper alarm system shut down the van. And I was in the passenger seat. My stepmom and her good friend were in the 2 seats behind us. And in the very back of the van was my 14-year-old sister, Ashley. My dad begins talking to the officers, and the officers ask for, we need your license and registration. And my dad goes into this whole spiel about, I don't need one of those to travel upon the land. And as if you've ever heard in somebody that's very anti-government talk, it's the same stuff you would hear.
So he was a sovereign citizen?
Yes, absolutely. He was a sovereign
So
citizen.
they'll say, I wasn't driving.
I was traveling.
I was traveling.
Yes.
Oh, how many of those clients did I have?
I'm sure you had a
Somebody
few.
else take him. They wouldn't even sign the papers.
They
I
won't
mean,
listen. They
it
won't
was-
sign anything. So that's exactly what was transpiring.
Oh, man.
So the officer is talking to us, and next thing I know, SWAT teams are coming. More police are coming. At one point, a TV camera is coming, and we just refused to get out of the van. And I can remember sitting there with my feet on the dash. I had a white t-shirt on with an embroidered Mickey Mouse and Minnie Mouse on it, and red jeans, this brand of Karl Kani, a Karl Kani jacket, these Karl Kani boots. And I thought I was cool, just had my feet up on the dash. And now it's starting to get serious because the SWAT team is starting to surround the van. And after probably half an hour, 45 minutes of different officers trying to get my dad out of the van, they bring the SWAT team is around, and they bring this half of a semi and back it up to our van. And they put a long bar on our windshield, which then they flipped a button, and the light turned on, and it was to heat us out of the van. So it actually got to be like 110 degrees in the van.
That would do it for me.
Yeah, I was about done. And then at that point, I had to
Kinda
go to
like
the
outside
bathroom.
Today.
Yeah,
You
so
had to go to the bathroom. Boy, if that doesn't
That was-
interrupt your plans.
that was not good, because then I'm kind of dancing in the front seat, and my dad is talking to us like nonchalantly, like it's okay, we'll be on our way soon. And I'm like, Dad, I don't think we're going anywhere. And
Did he really think that
Yes.
they were going to be like,
Yes.
okay, you just go on then?
Yes. In fact, he pulled out of his bag, when they asked for his registration, he pulled out the certificate of origin to this van, which to my understanding is what a dealership gets with a new car. It's not the title, so he pulls
birth
this
certificate.
Yeah, so he pulls that out and he hands it to him. He's like, I own this. No state owns my vehicle. I own it. And I guess I should say the license plate that he had on the van said Vegas 95, and he bought it at a shop in Las Vegas. It wasn't even a real license plate. And so they were talking about that. They were talking about, we don't want the certificate of origin, sir. We want your driver's license, and we want your registration. They weren't getting it because he didn't have it. And so the heat lamp didn't work. The truck pulls away, and the SWAT team now lines up, and we each had a shotgun pointed at us. And so at the front driver's side headlight, there was a SWAT team member leaned over with a shotgun pointed right at me, so not even 6 feet from me. And my dad at that point, I could tell, got nervous. And he said, just don't move. Well, when you have to go to the bathroom, it's hard not to move, but I knew I needed to just stay still. Before I even could think, there were suction cups up to my dad's window. The glass shattered. I saw arms reaching in, and they pulled him out. And within 10 seconds, they were at my door. And I opened the door and was thrown into the gravel, and rightfully so. We didn't get out of the car. And I laid with gravel in my face and knees in my back as I was being handcuffed. And they walked us around. There were TV cameras and lots of lights, spotlights on us. they were dumping stuff out on the back of the squad cars. And so I remember watching my purse get dumped out and being upset because I had something of my mom and my brothers in there. And I knew I wasn't going to get it back. And so I also knew I was a runaway. And so I didn't know what would happen with me, let alone now all this happened. And so we were taken to a precinct in Brooklyn, put in a squad car, and it was my first time seeing Times Square because we rode through Times Square and I was in the back of a police car.
Were you able to enjoy all the lights and the action?
There was a lot of lights.
Were you just like, this isn't what I wanted to do in New York?
This was not my plan in New York. And so we got to this precinct and I'm leaving out some details purposefully that are in the book, but I remember sitting there and my dad and Dana, the man from the other van, were handcuffed to a chair, and all the women from the van, our van and the other van, were in a cell in the back of this office. And I remember a lady, a sergeant, walking in, and she was a very strong, tall, scary lady. She was mad and she was not happy. And I remember her saying, "You guys are in a little bit of trouble." And I remember looking at her like, I'm not, they are, but I'm not. And I remember her saying there was a loaded .357 with 350 rounds of hollow bullets in the bag. And in the state of New York, that's a Class C felony. Yeah. And so I remember thinking, 16, 17 years old, I know a felony is not a good thing. And so next thing I knew, they came and got the women, and I was handcuffed to my sister, and they took us out of the building into a Sally Port, and we got on that same bus that I saw in the Lockup Rikers Island show. The bottom of it was blue. It was like a shorter school bus. The bottom of it was blue, and there was an orange stripe. And I remember thinking when I got on that bus, like, well, I know this is not happening. I know this is not deja vu. And I said I wanted to go see Rikers Island. And I really believed it wasn't. I just thought, they're going to take us to a county jail. Well, there were some guys in the back of this van, and they were like, we're all dressed. We have a lot of jewelry on. My stepmom and Paula, the lady with her, had a lot of jewelry on. And they're going, "You guys don't look like you should be going to Rikers Island. You're like a family. Like, what's happening?" And so right then and there, I'll never forget him saying that, because I thought, I'm never going home. We, sure enough, are pulling onto an island, and I remember looking out and there being water. Not a lot. It's a shorter driveway, but I remember pulling in and all the barbed wire fences, and being taken in and being accused of being a KKK member, because this is a 97% Hispanic and African American prison. Somebody had put on our intake papers that we were KKK members. Oh, no. Luckily, we had an amazing sergeant come over to us because we were put in our own cell. And I'll never forget looking around at these women, cells that should have had no more than 5 people in it with 50 people. I mean, they were shoulder to shoulder, laying down, standing up, crying. It was horrific. And here, us 5 were in our own cell.
Kind of like a protective custody
Yeah,
thing? Like,
yeah.
You couldn't hang with those guys?
Yes, absolutely. And thank God for that, because he really saved me in that moment, because everything that was happening was very scary. And as a teenager, you don't even realize how dangerous that situation was. But this sergeant did. And it was actually a lady talking to us who said, "I'm going to get my sergeant because you guys aren't going to make it here." And I remember sitting there, and I remember this sergeant coming over, and he said, "I've worked at Rikers Island for 17 years, and I've never seen on somebody's intake papers that they were racist, that they were KKK or white supremacist. You will not live a day here." And he was serious, and he was frustrated. And my stepmom was a brilliant, the way she talked was just, you just listened to her. And she made it very clear that we had a small standoff. There were some people that didn't like us, and she didn't know why, but that absolutely not, that wasn't true. And so that sergeant made a decision in that moment not to put us in general population, and they took us to protective custody. And that was after going through some very horrific things, which still to this day bother me, because as a teenager, you shouldn't have to be in front of 3 men and have a pap smear. We had to wash with head lice, shampoo, naked, and there was all men in that room. And I was a child. My sister was 14.
Yeah.
Why still to this day, I understand cavity searches, but that was so much more.
Well, and not by men.
No, not by men.
That would never happen now, would it?
It wouldn't happen now. So it was hard to believe that was happening then. And I remember having to intentionally take a footstep in that room, because all of us were lined up on a wall while the next person would come out of the shower and get on that bed. And I remember, just because of some things in my past, I had to, my brain had to physically tell my foot to take another step. I was that scared. And so they took us back to our cell. My stepmom had to argue about my sister because they couldn't figure out who she was, let alone how old she was. And my stepmom actually lied about her and said she was older to keep her with us. She was 14 in all reality in Rikers Island.
So that makes sense. So they wouldn't get separated and take her to juvenile place.
Yes, because that's what would have happened.
Yeah, sure.
And they were even, a couple of the officers were pretty nice about it, just saying, you don't want her here. And my stepmom was just very adamant that she did want her there. She wanted her with her. So after all that, and there's a little more that went to that, but then they did take us to protective custody. And when we walked in, generally, I soon learned that people would, when you came into that unit, you would get 2 sheets, a blanket, a green cup, toothbrush, toothpaste, and a comb. And we weren't given that. We weren't even given a cup. We were given 1 sheet by the guard. Well, then a lady comes up to us, and actually we put our sheet in our room, and we all came back out, and there were probably 5 tables on the first floor of this 2-tiered unit. Our rooms were all upstairs, and we put our sheet in, and we came back out. We sat at a table, and a lady came up behind me, and she said, I gotta know who you guys are. That guard just told me to come beat your ass. And so, excuse my language, but that's her exact words in my ear. And I remember my stepmom just going crazy and going in. And it was at that point I understood that, geez, like there's this, even the guards are against us at this point, and how scared I really became. And that night, my first night in that cell, how scared I was locked in there. And then the next day, we luckily got to be friends with these women. We got to hear their stories, and it's really where I grew a passion for working with women, because you hear the traumas, you hear the realities some of these women were facing and the sentences that they were facing, and you're going, that's just not okay. Mm-hmm. And obviously, I'm sure there were stories that weren't all the way truthful, and I understood that. But by the 3rd day, they let my stepmom go with a minister to talk to my dad, who was actually taken to a county jail. Because what happens in the boroughs of New York is, at that time, if you were a female and you were arrested and didn't have bail, you went to Rikers. But if you were a male, there was county jails. So somehow 2 ministers got together, and they were able to put a phone call together between my dad and my stepmom. And the next day we had visitors, some really good friends of my dad's who lived in Queens, who had been doing the law seminars with him, or the America First seminars with him, and they were African American. And thank the Lord for that, because on our way to the visiting room, they put us in a cell, and we had women reaching through the bars trying to get us, trying to grab my hair. Once we got in the visiting room, the whole demeanor towards us changed. And it was like that rumor was spread before we got there, and then it changed in that moment. I remember Deanna and Eric Murphy were their names, and I remember just putting my head on Deanna's shoulder, like, get me out of here, I'm so scared. I got to spend time praying. I knew to pray. My dad taught me that at a very young age. When I was scared, and still to this day, I know if I'm troubled, have anxiety, or I'm scared about something, that's the first thing I do. And so we had court on a Saturday, and the courtroom was full of supporters of my dad who had been in these seminars. And they released everyone. There was some discussion. They had brought my dad in, and I remember seeing him. And for that moment, I felt safe.
Okay, was there no like anger? Like, Dad?
No.
What the heck?
Not yet. Not yet.
'Cause
There
I'm
wasn't.
angry.
Yeah.
You know,
I know.
just
I
like,
get it. Yeah.
Yeah, anyway.
It wasn't because the life I was living, I felt like I was so free. And I think that year of being away, that's all I dreamed of was freedom. I didn't want to be locked in a place. I didn't want that just doesn't work for me. And so I think it was the freedom. It was the fact that I still maintained he was my dad. I didn't see him as this anti-government extremist. I didn't. There were times that him and I would just sit and talk, and he'd forget about that stuff even for a moment, and I would just suck that in because I wanted my old dad back. And so they gave my dad, they started with Ashley. We were all in a line, and the judge said, "We have reason to believe she's 14 years old. She is dismissed." And Ashley got to turn and go right out into the galley of the courtroom of my dad's supporters, found Deanna and Eric and a couple other people, and she got to leave. And then they came to me, and the district attorney said, "Your Honor, she's a runaway out of Iowa. We can't let her go. She's a missing person." And my dad jumped in and he said, "How is she missing? She's right here." And so the judge said, in the state of New York, at the age of 17, she's an adult, $2,500 cash bond. Went to my stepmom and Paula, gave them $5,000 cash, went to my dad and the other man, the other Dana, and they gave them $25,000 or surety. And so I remember them taking us back into the cells, and I thought, nobody's going to pay $2,500 to get me out. And I just cried. I thought, I'm going back to Rikers Island. And sure enough, somebody paid it. And within about an hour, I was out. I ran to the payphone, and I didn't call Angie, or I didn't call my mom. I called my best friend, Angie. And so I said, "Angie, I just got out of Rikers Island." And she's going, "What's Rikers Island?" I'm like, "Angie, I just got out of prison. I want to come home." And so that's where that started.
Well, this is a good place to break.
Yes.
Wow. What a story.
Yeah.
What a story. And I feel like that's just the beginning of your not your real story, but that's just the beginning of another really good story. So we're just going to pause. We're going to come back next week.
Yes, thank you.